Welcome to the Expanding Consciousness podcast with your hosts, Michael Wally and Nicholas Haag. In this podcast, we explore ways to sharpen our awareness, make life more enjoyable, be a little kinder, become more authentic, less reactive, more present, and ultimately expand our consciousness. We're happy to have you along for the ride, and if you do enjoy these conversations, please leave a review or a comment, as this goes a long way for us. Enough of the promotional talk and enjoy this episode.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. This week we were thinking about revisiting that idea of kind of doing a little bit of live coaching. Nick just had a class on coaching and is kind of eager to take that role. So I was thinking I'd drum up one of my mini issues and share it, and then maybe we can just kind of see where we go from there. So yeah. The issue that I kind of came up with, it's pretty, pervasive in my life. And I would say that in a lot of ways, I kind of struggle to, and there it is again, where I constantly kind of walk back what I'm saying, like by saying kind of, or maybe, or just kind of not really committing. And maybe this is also a kind of related problem. But in any case, the problem that I kind of want to get at here is struggling to be authentic, like in social situations. A lot of times I find that I'm very up in my head and I'm not necessarily acting, I guess you could say, naturally as much as I might like. And I notice that I'm kind of a bit of a chameleon, a bit of a people pleaser, right? Like I'll act differently. I'll try to anticipate what other people how they want me to show up. And I'll try to do that. And this has kind of surfaced and become particularly relevant to me because right now I'm applying to graduate school. As part of the process, I have to write an essay, and I also did a virtual interview yesterday. And I noticed this tendency in myself to really try and cater my responses to what I think people are looking for, rather than just being myself, rather than just being authentic. So that's kind of where I'm starting. So what questions you got for me, or how can we drill into this and get to the root of it?
Let's see. I can definitely see how an interview situation can bring up the specific question, because you think a lot about what is expected from me, how do I present myself while still maintaining authentic. So yeah, I can see how that happens. But maybe to stay with the problem, if it's a problem for you for a bit, maybe you can share a bit. So you notice this kind of pattern that you have a tendency to adapt to situations or to try to anticipate what people expect from you. And so far, that seems also like a helpful pattern. I believe that maybe, this is also something that through your life perhaps was helpful in many situations. Like sure. We're talking about interviews, all these kind of things where you need to present yourself. So maybe you can describe a little bit why you think it is a problem for you. Yeah. And I also just kind of want to draw this out as an aside. I really appreciate the way that you approached that and kind of initially just saying like, this can be something really valuable. And I totally agree that it is, potentially useful in a lot of situations to take into consideration what people are looking for. I think where it kind of becomes problematic for me is when it really overrides my authenticity, when it really overrides just being myself. So let me see if I can come up with a good example of this. So I've kind of been struggling to write this essay for the admissions a little bit. And I find that a lot of times I'm just kind of like listing off things that I think, that I've done, or experiences that I had that I think kind of check some of the boxes they might be looking for. So for example, so this particular school was founded by Chogyam Trungpa, and I'm really interested in him. And I keep doing like this name dropping and stuff in my essays where I'm like, oh yeah, and I read this book by this person, and there's not really much substance. It feels like there's a lot of fluff. It feels like I'm kind of just trying to spread myself really thin and check a lot of boxes. Like, oh yeah, he's studied Ram Dass, he's studied Chogyam Trungpa, he's done a bunch of yoga, and there's not really much substance to it. Whereas
And this really came to light for me after the virtual interview, because I recognized this in myself, and it was honestly kind of motivating in the sense I felt like, okay, maybe I can write the essay a little bit better now, and just really try to be, I just try to be myself, try to really share what's authentically going on in me. So for example, to kind of continue painting this picture, on the one hand, when I'm kind of being a lot less authentic, I'm kind of checking these boxes, I'm name dropping or whatever, and it just really isn't, there's no substance. On the other hand, the approach that I would really like to take, that I find myself kind of struggling with, or maybe there's some fear potentially around, hey, if I really, expose myself, or if I'm really vulnerable in this way, and then I get rejected, then it feels so much heavier. Whereas if I just kind of put out a false front and that gets rejected, then it doesn't really hurt, I guess, in a sense. But anyways, I could probably keep rambling, so I just kind of want to stop there and check in.
Well, maybe let's expand it just a little bit more, because I feel the example that you brought up, I mean, there is a certain, let's say, masquerade going on. There's certain formality to these processes and so on. It's also expected that you don't bring your full self to such a situation. So maybe it's not the perfect example, but what I'd also like to see maybe is there any other areas in your life where this is affecting you? Like, I don't know, in personal relationships, or in general at work, or where else do you have this feeling that you're not showing up authentically?
Yeah, honestly, if I look at it, I'd say in pretty much almost every aspect of my life, right? In terms of, let's see. So for example, I had some people over to my house and helped me doing some work on my house. And when I was in, it's interesting, the way that I immediately go to describe it is when I was in that role, like I was in the role of, managing a crew of workers essentially. And I wasn't really like, I think what's difficult about describing this is I don't even necessarily know what it looks like entirely to be authentic. Right? Like I know what it looks like when I'm not being authentic, but to actually describe what it looks like when I'm being authentic is kind of, it's almost in a sense kind of antithetical. It's kind of a moving target in a way, right? Because in order to be authentic, I need to be like spontaneous, I guess is one word that kind of comes to mind. Having expectations or having a lot of plans in my head kind of makes it a lot more difficult to be spontaneous and respond naturally. I kind of have a plan, and a lot of times that plan is kind of overriding, my natural inclinations. So I don't know if I answered your question very well of like other places that it's showing up in my life.
No, I think it's a great example. Before trying to like look into the direction of a solution, maybe also can you tell me if you take that example and maybe think about afterwards. So you have a situation, and then afterwards you're left with a certain feeling, or you're reflecting and you're like, why am I acting a certain way? Can you describe that feeling?
Yeah. I like this question. It feels uncomfortable. Let's see. I guess if I were to describe it, there's a certain amount of discomfort that comes with it. There's kind of, it's fairly subtle, and I might be a little bit hyperbolic in the way that I'm describing it, but there's almost like a sense of betrayal, like self-betrayal. There's kind of, there's some guilt in that, right? Like almost a sense that I'm like harming myself, or kind of just, that word betrayal comes back up again. So discomfort, betrayal. I want to say lack of authenticity, but I think that's kind of missing the point in a way.
Yeah. Go ahead. I think that sounded very authentic right now. You're describing it. So let's stick with that. Betrayal. From the top of your mind, do you also have a feeling of who you are betraying?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like my authentic self, or, maybe even get rid of the qualifier authentic and just say just myself.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, because why would you be betraying yourself? Because in a way, perhaps that authentic self did not even show up, right? Like, did it even have an opportunity to be there?
Yeah, I would say that there might, no, not really. And certainly like in terms of appearances, I would say it really didn't show up. in terms of my experience, it was kind of maybe bubbling just beneath the surface. There was, inclinations. There was, I guess just inclinations, just, I guess that's best I can describe it right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you definitely have a sense of, so there is an authentic you, and you're not giving it room in some situations, yet there is an inclination for it to show up.
Yeah.
And if you fail to do so, you feel like you're betraying it, rightfully so, because you're not giving it the proper space to show up. So, your authentic self must have some frustration, and I believe maybe it even grows over time as more and more situations occur where you don't give it a chance to show up. Now, maybe to reflect on the question of why are you having these patterns in place to prevent your authentic self from showing? Like, what would happen if you just let it show?
Yeah. I guess what kind of comes up for me is again kind of this sense of fear, this fear of rejection, this, I guess, a fear of failure. It's almost as if I kind of have to steer myself in a way. It's like I don't trust myself. Yeah, I guess that's probably what is most prominent.
Why don't you trust yourself? Was there an instance where trusting yourself was led to something negative?
Yeah, there's nothing that stands out, but I guess, again, kind of getting back to this theme of fear of rejection, I can definitely, there's no particular instance that stands out, but there is kind of like this vague, general repeating pattern of feeling rejected, especially like in earlier childhood. And, as in particular, what's coming up for me right now is feeling rejected around having emotions or showing emotions, that kind of getting me ostracized or rejected by like classmates, or I kind of have these images of like being on the playground and being upset or crying or something, and just feeling like totally rejected by being in that state. Like it just wasn't okay, even though it was coming up naturally, right? Mm-hmm. And I think in that there's a lot of distrust of this kind of just allowing myself to be, because, well, if I allow myself to be, I might, express emotions that then kind of garner this rejection or this kind of feeling of being ostracized from other people.
Yeah. Okay. So there was definitely instances where just letting yourself loose, letting yourself be authentically led to some negative experiences that in a worst case would even led to be excluded from the group, or basically rejection. But when you look at it from today's perspective, so we're talking about your child self now, right? It's not even only your authentic, it's like your child self. What do you think your child self would have needed in those situations?
Yeah, what comes to mind most strongly is just like acceptance, just like maybe even just being let be, right? Like I think the main pain or wound of it was like part in the rejection of like the people not picking me for a team, or, however that rejection showed up. I think that's kind of the main kind of crux of it. And that if even if nothing would have happened, it would have been better. Right. But I guess if I had to choose how people would have responded that would have been like most beneficial for my development, it would have been like acceptance, or like, hey, are you okay? Or, and maybe not even that. Maybe just like, hey, it's okay to cry, or, just some sort of acceptance and understanding, I think would have been really beneficial.
Yeah. And if you take one of those situations, whatever first came to your mind, and if you imagine that there was a grown-up person in that situation, whoever that might be, just imagine that they were there. Do you think they could have intervened or somehow provided you support in that situation?
Yeah. The scenario that's coming to mind is like not getting picked for a team or something. And as you're asking that question, I'm really trying to consider like how could a grown-up in that situation have like lessened the impact or made it better. And nothing is really coming to mind, honestly. It kind of feels like it would have had to be acceptance from my peers rather than having like a grown-up kind of show up and enforce kindness or something, right? It feels like almost in a sense that wouldn't have satisfied me because there's that level of rejection from, my direct peers, I think still would have been wounding. I don't know. I think, again, if we get back to this question of like what I needed, I think acceptance from my peers.
And to some degree, I guess all of that is also normal childhood experiences, right?
Yeah.
Getting rejected is part of almost every kid's life. They need to go through it. So I guess like these situations that you described, it doesn't necessarily mean that, the kids involved in that were necessarily evil, right? It's also just regular experiences as a kid. Yet for you, somehow it left an imprint, which over time led you to, in a sense, develop part of your personality as, okay, I kind of need to put a mask on, let's say, in certain situations. So it sounds a bit like those rejections that you experienced as a kid, which are actually normal experiences, were kind of a confirmation of something that you were carrying perhaps even before that. So thinking again about, now that you already brought up some situations from childhood of rejection in a group or whatever, do you think those are like the earliest memories of you having that feeling, or does it go way back?
You know what? As you're asking that question, one thing that comes to mind is my relationship with my parents, and in particular, like especially when I was starting school. So I had an older sister, about 4 years older, and she was, I don't know, I guess the word overachiever comes to mind. She did really well in school, got good grades, worked really hard. And, I kind of followed in her footsteps. I went to a lot of the same schools. Of course, we lived in the same place. And so there was always kind of this expectation, in a sense, hanging over my head. And it wasn't necessarily explicit, but it was still something that I felt like this expectation to live up to, what she's already done. And in a lot of ways, I felt like I wasn't able to do that. Yeah, it's interesting. I do feel like there is almost this not enoughness, I guess, that's kind of underneath it. This sense of needing to earn love or needing to earn acceptance. Like it's not just, it's not something that you're entitled to, right? It's something that you got to go out and earn. And that feels, it doesn't feel very good, but it also feels very prominent, I guess.
Well, something to reflect on is maybe that how kids develop these kind of patterns is by just internalizing the expectations that exist in their environment. And that doesn't even mean that we're talking about like spoken out expectations. Just kids are almost magical at picking up whatever is the thing that will grant them love. And, perhaps maybe in this example where you're mentioning your sister, maybe it's just you observing how your sister was already skilled at that and you trying to adapt to that, yet maybe it doesn't fully fit your personality or it didn't come naturally to you. So it could be an adaptation strategy. It could be expectations from parents, just picking up the unset expectations in the room is what kids make their strategy for getting attention and love. And, how you're describing it, I can see maybe this is something at play, which then, then when you're older, you go into kindergarten, you go into school and all these social environments even amplifies more. I don't know, how does that sound to you?
It sounds like a lot to absorb for a second here. So there's a couple of things that kind of come up around this. One is I kind of want to backtrack a little bit on what I was saying as far as like how an adult might be able to help that, because I really appreciate that you point out that this is like a common experience for children, and it's not necessarily something that everyone comes away from with this kind of, I guess just call it a neurosis, right? Not everyone comes away from those experiences having this kind of personality trait of not enoughness and people pleasing, right? And I think, thinking back to your question of like what an adult could have offered, I think an adult maybe also could have offered just like acceptance of my feelings, or just kind of like the wisdom that this is just something that you're going to go through. This is just something that kids are going to go through. It's okay. It's okay to feel this rejection, right? It's okay to feel all the sadness that comes along with this. Because I think it was probably to some degree like a rejection of the feelings that are elicited from that situation that actually like causes it to make an impression, to kind of like stay with me, right? It's a rejection of those feelings. And if I was able to process them better, with the help of like a caring, well-regulated adult, then I probably could have avoided developing that. And I've just kind of gone on a total tangent and missed a little bit of what you said or what you asked. So I'm going to throw it back to you.
All good. Like this, what you said now, I can't tell you why, but it sounded super authentic and super honest. So I have the feeling that you're on the spot there. So what I'm hearing is what you would have needed as a kid is reassurance. Somebody safe who's able to co-regulate you, who's able to remind you that all of these things are normal experiences, that they will pass, that they will, they will not have necessarily negative consequences. And it's almost silly how simple of a thing that is, but you were not offered that in that moment. Yet, through life, you develop all of these things, right? I believe that you're able to even provide that for other people in your life, right? Co-regulation, reassurance, and so on. So, I mean, let me phrase it as a question. Do you think other people can trust you?
Boy, that's like I feel like that's a pretty heavy and loaded question. Like, boy, I feel very vulnerable just trying to answer it, right? Because in a sense, I feel like the only right answer is yes, that other people can trust me. Because I feel like if I were to say no to that, then there's almost like this devious, like intentional deception of other people. So yeah, I'm gonna try and just be with the discomfort of this question and, kind of answer like as authentically or realistically as I can. And I think it's very interesting how I really want to kind of pad my response and be like, well, all people are like this or something, right? I really want to kind of like let myself off the hook. But I think if I were being totally honest, I would say that, I'm trustworthy to the degree that I'm like in a well-regulated, well-rounded state. Like, so for example, if I'm in a really heightened fight or flight response, then chances are I'm not necessarily going to be honest with people. I'm going to be honest to the degree that I feel that it's going to help me survive. And I'm going to potentially like manipulate or lie to people, again, to the degree that I think that it's going to help me survive. So I guess, I kind of really dodging the question in so many different ways.
And just to be clear, I didn't mean to fire it as a loaded question. It's not a trick question.
Sure.
That was not the intention, but I think it again pointed out that this is specifically something to look at. And I mean, you already said it earlier, but there's perhaps still an issue with trust towards yourself or towards your higher self, child self, whatever you want to call it. Well, let's turn it around for a bit. Perhaps maybe that's an easier question. We already talked about some of the qualities that lead you to perhaps not trusting yourself. When you think about those qualities like authenticity, emotionality, spontaneity, these kind of things, is that something that you like in other people?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I would say just in general, when someone's like more authentic, it just feels easier to connect to them. Yeah, I think there's less of a veil between that person and I when they're being authentic, right? And so it's just, and I think in general, like as human beings, again, I'm kind of trying to let myself off the hook for whatever reason, maybe something to dig into. But I think kind of as human beings that we're drawn to authenticity, right? We're drawn to people who have the courage to be themselves. So I would say, yeah, I like authenticity in other people. And I like spontaneity because I see those almost as synonymous in a way.
And can you trust people that have these qualities?
Yeah, that's another interesting question. Can you trust people? I suppose to the degree that you can expect human beings to be consistent, which I don't feel like I can trust people to be consistent. And so even if someone is showing me like an authentic side that I feel like, that's worthy of trust in a sense, I don't know if I trust that person to stay in that state to like continue being authentic. And I suppose, maybe there's another wound here where someone, there's a certain expectation of how someone's going to show up and they just totally violate that expectation.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think whatever this problem is that you're describing with authenticity is something that affects everybody to a degree. I don't think anybody is like 100% authentic all the time. So I think people slip in and out of those states. People are just human and also disappoint, of course. Yet maybe you do have people in your life that have actually those qualities and that are close to you, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's like a question. I don't know if I could honestly think of anyone that I would point to, and I feel like I totally trust this person. This person's like totally authentic. It kind of again gets back to that idea that we're all putting up, to some degree a facade, and the people that I'm closest with. I mean, so for example, with my wife, when I think of someone who I would trust the most, I would definitely probably put her at the top.
Why, or not why, but because that's a stupid question, but can you describe maybe what qualities does she have that she's on top of your list?
Yeah. I guess part of it comes from that question of consistency, just because I'm around this person so much. I've seen all of their patterns for the most part that from my perspective, they are being consistent because I've witnessed, kind of like the whole gamut, the whole spectrum of them. And so I guess one of the qualities is just spending time with someone and really getting to know them, getting to know all facets of them. And then that question of consistency kind of goes away because all the ways that they show up. And so in that sense, they are being consistent, I guess, from your perspective.
Okay. So I hear that consistency is kind of a quality that is important to you, that you know what to expect from a person, how they would show up in a certain situation, right?
Yeah, that's interesting as you're kind of detailing it out like that, because as you're saying it, it's almost kind of antithetical in a way to this idea of authenticity. Because if I guess there's kind of a question there of whether or not, if I am being consistent, can I be consistent and authentic? Are those two things, to some degree, like mutually exclusive in the sense that, well, if I'm being entirely consistent, then I'm not going to be authentic because right. It's like I can only be worshiping one quality of myself at a time or something. And if I'm worshiping my consistency or if I'm trying to be consistent, then that takes precedence over being authentic.
I see your point. I didn't fully grasp the importance of consistency yet for you. Like, why is it so important to be consistent?
Yeah, I guess that kind of gets to this question of like trustworthiness, right? And yeah, boy, I find I'm almost just kind of confusing myself in all this, but I'm going to kind of just answer and forge forward. Because I think in order to feel like I can trust someone, I need to have, they need to meet my expectations of how they're going to act or how they're going to show up, how they're going to respond in certain situations. And that, again, almost kind of like robs some of their authenticity in a way.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same way. It's basically what you can provide, right? If I understood it correctly, or actually that's still just a guess, but how you're describing is that you do have this mask that you put on that helps you in certain situations, and that mask is consistent, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that's a quality that you give to that part of yourself. And that's something you're able to provide for people, right? When you show up in that way, basically you're consistent for people. It's something they can rely on.
Yeah.
So that's a great quality, but I think you want to get rid of that, right? I mean, that's somehow we started, if you think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think it does kind of come back to this question of like, can you both prioritize consistency and authenticity, and like to what degree are those things at odds?
But I mean, at this point, it sounds like it's something that you practiced your whole life. Consistency, consistency. I'm not getting confused. No, consistency is something that you are reliably able to deliver, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
So I think it's pretty safe to say that doesn't go anywhere. Like it's so ingrained, this pattern. I think you're at this point, you're like able to, call it up whenever you need. Even if you go into uncertainty, authenticity for a time, you'll always be able to come back to that, right?
Yeah. I really appreciate what you're pointing out here. It feels very insightful that I don't have to keep it in mind in order to be able to like utilize it. I don't have to like worship it. I don't have to put it on a pedestal in order to still be able to utilize it. And honestly, that really resonates with me in a lot of ways, because that it's very reminiscent of so much of what I learned from psychedelics and so much what I learned in terms of just working with the ego and trying to let go of the ego. One of the biggest hurdles there is always this fear of, well, if I let it go, I won't get it back, in a sense, right? Especially when it comes to something like your sanity, for example. If you're tripping and you feel like you have an opportunity to let go of your sanity, there's this fear that you won't get it back, or that it's not something that you can just kind of call upon. And what you're saying here and doing a very good job convincing me of, and I think that's true, is that you don't have to hold it so tightly in order to be able to utilize it.
Yeah.
So where does that leave us though? Like, okay.
Well, I think that kind of settles the question about consistency, because so what we know for sure, the thing with ego is it always waits at the door. Whenever you go somewhere where your ego is not there, from experience, we know it waits at the door. When you're back, it'll be there for you to pick up. It doesn't go anywhere. It will come back and bother you in any case. But so just to not get super focused on consistency, because I think that's not something you need to fight for. Yeah. But coming back to these other qualities, because you described actually qualities in other people that go into the category of masking, but that's actually where you want to move away from. So I'm pretty sure that, for example, your wife also has qualities of, I don't know, being emotional, being vulnerable, being authentic, and so on. And that there is these moments where also she becomes inconsistent, perhaps unpredictable, and so on, as everybody does. So I'm wondering, how do you react in those situations?
Yeah, the first word that comes to mind is consistently. Right.
Amazing.
Yeah, I've had some pretty, from my perspective at least, I don't know how other people are experiencing me, but I feel like I've had some pretty significant shifts in terms of the way that I've been responding to the world over the past few months, certainly over the past year or so, where I feel like I'm more capable of essentially choosing how I want to show up, choosing how I respond, rather than acting as compulsively. Because I would say more in the past, when someone has kind of acted inconsistently towards me, then I would tend to probably be a little bit more reactive. I would tend to be a little bit caught off guard and kind of put into like a survival state to some degree. And that would come forward, and that I would probably then move into like a more defensive state, or kind of like a defense attack state, and kind of blame the other person for the way that I am or the way that I'm feeling in that situation. And I feel that I've moved past that to some degree, where I feel like I'm more capable of just responding from kind of a place of love or kindness. And so when someone's, responding to me inconsistently, I think more now I'm able to see it as, one of their own neurosis at play, right? And kind of have some empathy and compassion for that, and not be as affected as I had been in the past.
Okay, we're still at the consistency question, but maybe to point a question in a slightly different direction. How does your image, perception of, let's say, with the example of your wife, change when she does have a authentic and consistent reaction?
You said authentic, inconsistent, like not consistent?
Yeah, exactly. For me, those are opposites, right? Because if somebody's being authentic, they're also being kind of inconsistent, unpredictable. Maybe it's the better word, right?
Sure. Yeah. Dang, it seems like we can't get away from this question of the compatibility of consistency and authenticity. But so the question is, how do I see that person when they're showing up authentically?
Yeah, I mean, if people are going through something and they're having an emotional reaction, maybe they're in a situation that is too much for them. Maybe they're overwhelmed. Like, does that change your view of them?
Certainly. So for example, like with my wife or someone that I know really well, I would say that, boy, I was trying to avoid using the word consistency, but I would say that the inconsistencies, really aren't off-putting when I know someone fairly well, right? Because it's just like an aberration. It's not necessarily concerning, I guess. I guess on average, the inconsistency is kind of averages out to zero, essentially. So it's kind of almost not important. But with someone that I don't know very well and I don't have a lot of information on, when that inconsistency arises, it's a much greater portion of my experience of that person. And it doesn't average out to zero. It might average out to, a significant part of how I see that person. So I think whether or not consistency changes how I see people is kind of dependent upon how well I know that person. And the less well I know them, then the more likely I am to see them as inconsistent and perhaps like untrustworthy.
Yeah, I think it's actually a great insight that this connection that you made with inconsistency and trustworthiness, and that this is kind of an important aspect to you. That is certainly, I think, a good insight. Yet, we already talked about your child self, and we talked about like what would it have needed. So in a sense, for you, it is very acceptable for kids to be overwhelmed by life and have emotional reactions, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And how is that different for grown-ups? Wouldn't it be the same?
Yeah, I guess there's just kind of almost like this implicit expectation for grown-ups to be more in control of their emotions and to not have emotional outbursts, to not have, to not display that kind of inconsistency, I guess.
Yeah, I see. So maybe also the problem would be that if somebody is having an outburst or is being overwhelmed, that puts you at risk of being overwhelmed as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, like, certainly from a biological perspective. And again, I guess I'm trying to let myself off the hook or pass the buck here to my biology, I guess. But yeah, just in terms of like survivability and stuff, of course you want to be around people that are going to be like more consistent and predictable.
Yeah. So we already know what you would have needed as a kid.
Yeah.
But thinking about right now, you want to get more in touch with your inner self. What does it need for this to happen?
Yeah, probably, before you even completed the question, and this speaks so well to the, how good of a job you're doing coaching right now, I would say, is because I feel like the answers are just kind of coming up. And that totally made the question slip my mind. What was the question again?
Yeah. What if you think about your inner self that you do want to connect with more and wanted to show up more? What does it need for that to happen?
Yeah. I feel like it probably needs that same acceptance, that I felt that I lacked in childhood. That I need to kind of like almost experiment with it in a way, like give myself the opportunity to show up authentically. And then hopefully be in such an environment that is welcomed, that is accepted. And also, as I'm saying this, welcoming and accepting it myself. I think, I think, as we're going through this session, I'm really feeling like I can be the one that I need for myself, right? Like I can accept my own authenticity, and that in a way gives me the permission, in a way that kind of heals the wound, it gives me, permission is the word that comes to mind. Yeah,
that sounds very authentic. So when you think about it as a relationship between a grown-up and a kid, it's almost like you are the parent for that kid. And does the parent of a kid allow the kid to try and fail?
Well, yeah. I mean, I feel like that's should be a given. Like a good parent, I think you have to let the kid fail.
Right. So one of the aspects we talked about earlier is also kind of the fear of failure and fear of rejection and so on. And yet knowing all of that as a grown-up, when you're with a kid, you let it try out things, you let it fail. Do you reject the kid if it fails and has to try again?
No.
Yeah. So I think that's exactly what you could do for yourself. Give the space for the kid to show up again, to try itself out, to also get rejected, also to fail at it, also to get embarrassed. All of these feelings that you have to go through, get used to, but perhaps be the one that is reassuring, co-regulating, and reaffirming that this is a normal process. And I'm just mentioning that because I don't believe that you just make a decision and then suddenly your authentic self is going to show up and it's going to be 100% there. There's going to be no problems with it. No, you come from a very strong need for consistency, yet also now a stronger and stronger need to connect with your authentic self. But it's going to take some time, right, to get used to that. And also to get used to the unpredictability of your authentic self. Because for all you know, I mean, it's definitely not consistent, right?
Yeah. There's also this other kind of quality that's coming up in terms of being authentic. And that's kind of interesting. I don't know if I totally want to go on this tangent, but it came to mind, so I'm going to bring it up. And that's sort of like that you don't get to choose, right? Like I don't get to choose who I am. This is kind of what I'm discovering more and more is I really don't get to choose who I am. I kind of discover it. And then there's this question of, do I allow it? Am I okay with that? And I think, I want to be okay with that because I think I'm most capable when I am being authentic, when I am being who I'm supposed to be. But there's I notice there's a fear that kind of comes along with that in the sense that I don't get to choose it. I don't get to choose, how I really am in a way, right? Like, I mean, I can have values and stuff, but when my authentic self shows up, there are things that I don't know about myself that just kind of like appear in a way.
Yeah. I mean, in the same way that people don't get to choose their kids, basically, right?
Yeah.
You also need to kind of accept them for what they are and try to embrace them. But I think the authentic self holds certain very important qualities that will never be part of the masking personality. Can you imagine anything? What would you describe? Maybe tell me some qualities of the authentic self.
Yeah. So, there's this really interesting question because I don't think that there's much concretely that can be said about the authentic self. I think anything that I can say about the authentic self tends to be more general, right? Like the authentic self responds naturally or something, right? Like I can't say that the authentic self always responds this way in this situation or something, because then it wouldn't be authentic, right? Like the authentic self tends to be spontaneous, right? I think that there's oftentimes a certain like magnetism when you're being your authentic self that people are like attracted to that. So I think, those are some qualities that come to mind. I think there's a certain quality of like ease. Like it's like when I'm holding up the mask or the facade, that's something that I have to do, right? Like that requires effort, that requires willpower. But when I'm being my authentic self, there's not really anything to do. It's almost like it's more just happening and I'm just witnessing.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. At ease. So that means no tension. Somebody who is at ease. They're not tense and they are not in resistance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's almost the opposite of what the masking personality does. That's like, I need to control the situation. I'm in resistance, whatever is going to come up, and I need to put up this mask and I need to anticipate whatever that person wants. Is like almost in a robotic way in resistance with reality and trying to control whatever is going on, which, as we know, we cannot do that, of course. Yet it's a very good try. And the authentic self is the opposite. It is at ease with how it is, right?
Yeah.
So that's what is enabling that quality. What comes up for me is acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah, that feels like, in a sense, almost that's all that's needed. There's acceptance, and I guess if I were to say something else, that there's also like this surrender, right? It comes back to this idea of you don't really get to choose your authentic self. You really only get to choose whether or not you accept your authentic self. And it seems like, from my experiences at least, it seems like a very untenable proposition. It does not seem to be beneficial to us whatsoever to reject our authentic selves.
Yeah. What came up now for me is maybe one aspect that's maybe something just for you to explore otherwise or on the side. And that's most of the qualities that you described now for the authentic self could be kind of feminine qualities. And I mean that in the sense, like if you want to do the Jungian split into like anima and animus, I think what could help you is getting more in touch and familiarizing yourself with your anima. Basically the female archetype within yourself, because from what I'm hearing, the masking unauthentic self has a lot of male animus qualities. Like, it's controlling, it's consistent, secure. It provides this solid thing. And anima is kind of the opposite. It is unpredictable. It is in flow. It doesn't have expectation. It's spontaneous. It's changing. All of these qualities. So yeah, maybe it will be interesting for you to think about what situations could I create in my life that allows these qualities to even come forth more.
Yeah.
Or for you to be able to play around with that.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I like that idea. And it also really resonates to kind of be inviting in more of kind of like the feminine or the anima, as you were saying. And that's honestly been a large kind of aspect of my journey for a while now. And so that it really resonates and it makes a lot of sense. And it's also motivating to have it brought up within this context because it makes a lot of sense to me, I guess.
Yeah. And as far as I know you, I definitely think that you already make opportunities to, lean into that side. That's for sure. Okay. So I think we've gathered a ton of insight here around the question of your authentic self. Now reflecting on this conversation, do you feel like there is some more open question, something we should dig into?
Yeah, good question. I think some of my biggest takeaways are really around, first, that I'm able to show up for myself as that parent, as that co-regulator, as that person that can kind of accept and say that, to tell myself, to comfort myself and say, like, this is just something that human beings go through and it's perfectly okay, right? So I think that's one of my big takeaways. And then also this question of like kind of consistency versus bringing consistency back versus authenticity. And it's interesting. It's almost as if the consistency is more of that masculine type quality. And the authenticity within this context is a little bit more of like that feminine type quality, right? And I feel like I have a lot to work with. I don't know if I could come up with any more questions.
Yeah, I think that's already some really good insights. And I think if you only try to make some opportunities for your authentic self to show up, I think that's already you've done a lot. And if you grow that relationship over time, I think it's going to get better and better. You're going to be more comfortable with it. And at the end, maybe you don't need the mask at all anymore. But if you do, it's waiting at the door. I think that's also what we learned.
Right. Yeah. I really like that lesson as well. Yeah. Honestly, this was pretty great. I think you did like a really good job. Just in terms of the way that you responded, it felt I didn't feel pressured. I felt heard a lot, which was really made it a lot easier to kind of like move through this stuff, because it felt like it was accepted and understood. That just kind of really lightened the load. So I just kind of want to give you that feedback. And one thought that comes to mind, just throwing this out there, I don't know if it'll happen, but if any of our listeners wanted to like go through a little coaching session or something, you hit us up and maybe we could bring you on and do like a little coaching session. But yeah, this was awesome. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. It was awesome for me as well. Thanks for opening up in that way, being very vulnerable and staying open even when we encountered some uncomfortable moments or questions for you. I think that's where the work is at. So yeah, I also think you did a great job. Thanks for being there.
Cool.